Walter, anybody who would like to believe in God, as I would, has to confront the problem of evil, as a theist might put it, or the argument from evil, as an atheist might put it, very early in their thinking. So let's do that. Let's discuss the argument from evil and ask, does evil disprove God? What are the kinds of arguments that we have to deal with?
Good. I love talking about this one. There really are different versions of the problem of evil or the argument from evil, and it's important to keep them distinct. One version is the logical version, and it actually tries to show that theology or theism is internally inconsistent, that it's just not logically possible that there would be a God, or that it's inconsistent with the existence of evil. So it's not logically possible that there would be a God if evil exists.
Because God is theoretically all-powerful and all-good, and you can't combine those together in a logical argument. That's the
Exactly.
attempt.
Yeah, exactly. That's the argument. But I think most people have given up on the logical problem of evil. They don't claim that it's a logical inconsistency among those different views. Instead, the claim is that evil and the amount of evil and the variety of kinds of evil and the intensity of that evil provides an awful lot of evidence against there being a God that's all-powerful and all-good. So that's called the evidential argument from evil against the existence of God.
We're bifurcating the argument to logical and evidential, and we're going to talk about the evidential.
Exactly.
Now, what is evil, and how do you begin to look at the different facets of it?
Well, I think it's very difficult to define evil in general. I'm not sure you can do it, but it's easy to give examples. Pain and suffering are evils. That's what you mean by evil. They're bad things that happen in people's lives. Death and disability, the inability to see, for example, even if it doesn't hurt, it makes you unable to get the things that you want. Those are examples of evil, and I think that's all the examples you really need to make the argument go.
Okay. Now, people talk about two different kinds of evil, a moral evil and a natural evil. How do you define those, and then how do you incorporate that in your argument?
Well, moral evil is normally seen as evil that occurs as a result of human acts of free will. So some people choose to engage in political campaigns or warfare, or they make political moves that cause famines so that their people in their enemies' groups will die off. And there are lots of suffering in the world is caused by human actions. Rapes and murders and thefts, all kinds of crimes fall under causes of moral evil. And that type of argument can be responded to. That is, an evidential argument from moral evil. One possible response is free will. People say, well, free will is a very valuable thing. God maybe allows free will in the world because free will is so valuable, even if some people will abuse that free will and cause harms to other people.
The argument would go even further than that. They would say that it would be impossible for God to create any world in which there were no possibility for evil if God wanted to have free will, and God had no choice in the matter. Because in order to have free will, you must allow the evil to be able to develop.
Yeah, they've got to say it's impossible, because if it's even possible, an omnipotent being could bring about that world, would have done it if it's omnipotent and all good. It would have done it. So they've got to say it's impossible, exactly. So I don't think that argument works, because I think that it's perfectly within an omnipotent being's capabilities to prevent the evil in the world while still allowing people to have free will. One example would be, say, someone who goes onto the internet and tries to lure young children into places where this predator can rape them or kill them. Well, God can just make that person's computer crash. And then he has free will, but not the ability to cause the evil. And so not freedom of action, but still freedom of will.
I think that argument is entirely right, but what we are now engaging in is a singular one-off kind of argument. Yes. And the way to attack this, if I were a theistic philosopher and engaging you in debate, I would say that you are being very simplistic, because it's not just one argument, but multiple arguments. So you're now having God to be a tinkerer with the world, and God has to tinker here and tinker there and just be constantly doing lots of things. But maybe that's not the way the world is structured.
Well, maybe not, but a lot of theologians think God is a tinkerer, answering prayers here and there and performing miracles here and there. Some theologians even claim that God is the cause of all events and all of these things that are happening. God as a tinkerer is nothing that I created.
Well, I think what we're saying, though, that you must understand the theological assumptions that people will have from which they develop arguments against the argument from evil. So in order to properly understand those.
Right.
All right, but let's go back to where you're feeling most comfortable.
Right.
And to present your argument from evil against the existence of God, which seems to be the evidential argument using natural evil in the world.
I like to focus on natural evil because it avoids all those questions about free will. And it doesn't seem to me that you need moral evil because there's so much natural evil in the world. You know, when an earthquake creates a tsunami and kills hundreds of thousands of people and leaves even more homeless, or when a birth defect occurs and a young child lives a short while in intense suffering without ever really gaining awareness of the child's parents or of God for that matter, then it seems to me you've got a type of evil which doesn't result from human acts of free will. It's natural evil. And the question is, why would God allow that? If God cares, just to take the birth defect example, if God cares about that young child, doesn't want that child to suffer all those different things and all that disability and then eventually death. In many, many cases, that's what happens. If God cares about the child, why would God let that happen? God has the power. So if God is omnipotent, God can stop it.
Nobody would argue with that.
If God is all good, then it seems to me God would stop it.
I've heard all the arguments, and let me tell you what I think are the best ones to counter that one. And that would say that what you have to assume is that, one, that God's vision of things is far greater than anything that we can imagine, even in principle. That sort of sets the tone. So that already intimidates you. Secondly, is that the sum total of good that this world will create because it's created in the world in the way that God did it, and good being defined in some very broad, expansive sense, will be overwhelmingly larger than the evil in a total sense, calculus at the end of the day being at the end of whenever things happen, if you really believe in God. That's number two. And number three, embedded within that, and these arguments work together, of course, is that you have to include some sort of an afterlife readjusting of the balance of the books. So you need God having this overwhelming a power and understanding of the universe. You have to have an overwhelming majority of good at the end of the day being created, and you need some kind of an afterlife to make those books balance properly. That's the only and best argument that I can see.
Okay, so let's take those one by one, and I'll start with the afterlife. I don't see how the afterlife is going to help. You've got a kid who's born with a birth defect, suffers for, let's just say, a few months or a few years, and then goes into heaven and is welcomed into heaven in the afterlife. And doesn't that compensate for the suffering? No, because God could have had that person go straight to heaven without all the suffering.
Sure.
God is omnipotent, and I don't see how getting rewards in the afterlife justifies making them go through the suffering in this life.
You're looking at this one individual as an isolated case.
Good.
You'd have to look at the totality of the plan for humanity, that the plan for humanity would be some sort of a glorious eternal life, and that the free will of this life, all living together, is a necessary part of the process. Right. You have to give that.
So God is going to make this kid suffer for the benefit of others.
God is not making this kid suffer, goes the argument, but the structure of the world that is needed so that all humanity can eventually attain whatever glories are going to be in heaven, is necessary to have the sufficient probabilistics of the world, sufficiently without God's intervention in the world, so that humans do this, that there's going to be random sufferings that God is not causing, but God is allowing in the system, and that is not intervening to change, and that some people differentially are going to have a lousy 3 years or 5 years or 50 years, and some people are going to have an undeserved 80 years of wealth and fame and everything else, and they're lousy people. All that's going to happen. But at the end of this whole process, that the sum total of good will be for the benefit of all.
Right. And since I'm not making the logical argument, I can allow that that's possible. It's possible. I just see no reason to believe it. This kid suffering from birth defects, and not just this kid, but thousands of kids over the centuries who were born with Down syndrome and suffered in the same way, I don't see how their suffering is necessary to create or make possible any of the other goods.
I can't make a judgment on any one case or even the totality of cases, but what you can say is that the free will of this world and the totality of this world with its probabilistics is necessary to create the ultimate good, and that the finite time that those people suffer, nobody's happy about that. The finite time will become as if zero when compared to the eternity that will be thereafter. That's the argument. That's not my argument. That's not my argument, and that is the argument, and it's the best I've heard, and I don't think it's refuted.
I wouldn't want to turn to the parents of this child who is suffering horribly and say that suffering counts for zero. Seems to me that suffering counts for something, and any compassionate person would have to recognize that. And any theist who is backed into the position of saying that the suffering of this innocent child counts for nothing is in a very difficult position. Secondly, I think you have to look at the totality of the universe with this child suffering and the totality of the universe without this child suffering. It seems to me God could pick between those two, and I can't see any good reason to pick the total universe where the child suffers instead of the total universe where the child doesn't suffer. And that's exactly the problem of evil.